tonight's title of the workshop is The New Digital SAT, Everything You Need to Know. And our presenter tonight is Dr. Alan Grapo. He does go by Alan. And so we are going to get started. Again, if you can mute yourself, we're going to give it away to Alan. And again, welcome.
Thank you very much. Very happy to be here. And feel free to ask any questions while I'm going through the slides. There should be the hand wave icon thing, right? So yeah, I'm happy to stop. I much prefer to address actual questions that you have. So yeah, feel free. But yeah, so my name is Alan Grabo. I've been teaching test prep at Breakthrough for 6 years since I took over from my colleague Harriet, who's been doing it for 30 years. I did start doing it full time right before COVID, which was a bad choice. There's been a lot of changes in the last couple of years in terms of it going test optional. Then there were a lot of debates about whether or not the SAT or the ACT were even a good idea, whether they were discriminatory. It's been in the news a lot lately. And kind of back and forth, but it seems like the news lately, and at least in the past couple weeks, has mostly been schools like Princeton are reinstating the requirements. Probably some of them will follow, but not all. And the feedback from this most recent digital SAT, which was last weekend, if you look through Reddit or basically student comments, are pretty mixed, but most people, most of the students really like the shortened format. That's definitely a huge plus. So yeah, what I'm going to be talking about is a little bit about the history of the SAT. I'll keep that brief. And because there's actually quite a lot to go over in terms of what has changed for the digital SAT. And if you weren't familiar with the pencil and paper one, then it's just an introduction to the SAT, so it kind of works. Let's see, and which test is better at the end? Yeah. So I need to get rid of these little webcams up here. 1 second. Okay, so yeah, so my company's called Breakthrough Test Prep. We're in Potomac. We focus on one-on-one individual tutoring. And if you have any questions after this, or if you're watching the video recording of this, feel free to give me an email. I am happy to provide resources, and we do like test prep strategy sessions if you have questions about which test is better for your team. Okay, so the SAT started back in 1901, and it's created by the College Board. The idea was that it would test your scholastic aptitude. I have some copies of some of these original ones, which are very, very interesting and very difficult. Where is this one? This is what it looked like when it first came out. So if you look at this right page, I don't know if can you read that? Probably not. It would the questions were something like, each group contains 6 words. 3 are related to each other in some definite way. Indicate which are most closely related by choosing those 3. These questions they were super, the College Board has gotten a lot better at making sure that the test is accurately assessing educational abilities and preparation for college than when it first came out. That's definitely something we can't argue with. So it's gone through a bunch of name changes. They've changed formats, so removing antonyms and how many questions per passage. That happened throughout the 90s, up until 2005.
What can I ask? Why did they remove antonyms? Was there a reason for that?
So again, early on in like psychoeducational assessments, they weren't quite as good with the statistics, I think. So they've been refining it to try to make sure that it's the goal with the with the scoring is always that it should correlate with college performance, right? So if they're making changes and suddenly like scores are dipping in some parts of the country or for certain demographics, and they're very, very detailed in terms of like socioeconomic factors. So they release a huge report every year in terms of like how different segments of the high school population are performing. But ultimately, if it's not predicting college success, then they're seeing it as a failure, and they're going to try to do something to change it. So that has been the guiding, philosophy behind most of their revisions. And in general, most changes have been from more complicated, more difficult, and requiring longer and sustained focus to shorter, faster, simpler. And there are mixed feelings about that, depending on who you ask.
Thank you. That's helpful.
Yeah. Uh, some of us may have been in the era where the 2400 point SAT was introduced, but that how long did that even last? Yeah, for about 10 years. It went from 1600, which was and now is the total score, went up to 2400. There were conversions, etc. But if there's any confusion about that, that was what happened there. At the same time, they also introduced the essays, and they also removed the analogies, which do survive on the SSAT, and that's very fun to teach. So yeah, we introduced the essay in 2005. Also introduced score choice. So we can talk about that a little bit more at the end. But one of the big things that parents don't know is that most schools now accept super scoring or score choice. So each school's admissions department website will list how they accept the test scores. Okay. So when your student or when your teen is getting ready for college applications, they go through the Common App portal, right? So it's a really streamlined process now where they put the schools that they're interested in, and once you get them kind of like sorted, you can write your essay and send everything out to those schools. The College Board is separate, but they will send your test scores to all those schools that you indicate. But some schools will say you need to send us all your scores. Some will say just send the best your best score in verbal and your best score in math, which can make a huge difference, right? So you take it the first time, you get a 500 in math and an 800 in verbal. The next time you do the opposite, then you've got a perfect score, right? So it can make a huge difference how that works. Usually we recommend taking it at least twice for that reason. There's very rarely students who don't improve on multiple test takings. Get out of the way. There it is. Okay, 2016, we got the score back to 1600. Changed a lot of the questions around. I don't think it's too important to get into that right now. But one of the biggest shifts in the last 10 years or so has been back when I studied for it, and most of us probably, the SAT was kind of synonymous with like big vocabulary words, right? Like fancy, never going to use them again words. That has slowly and steadily been removed. In the paper and pencil that we had up until last year, what I think they do a really good job of focusing on words that are like scientific words, words that you use in argumentation, a lot of stuff that you're going to need to understand how to use in college. And it's not so much that, ooh, I know what, parsimonious means, this like random kind of word, but that you actually understand what, for example, rational, right? It's a word like rational where a student would say, okay, I've heard that in certain contexts, but do you like if you actually understand what the meaning of it is as opposed to like emotional or there are multiple ways that you can use these words and they're all very functional. I think that's a pretty good change. So yeah, context and usage. Yeah, some changes in terms of how many question options there are, but none of this is super important now that we have the digital test. We no longer have any essays. There are no subject essays and there is no optional essay. So I know that's always a point of confusion. No essays on the digital test. So yeah, this digital SAT was available for international students last year. The one that was taken this weekend, so March, whatever, 11th or so, is the first digital SAT in the States. So from now on, both the PSAT and the SAT are both going to be digital only. So do I talk about this here? Yeah, I'll get back to that in a second. Okay, so the overview here is that the SAT has gone through a lot of changes in the last 100 years, but I think the take home is that it's still going to stay an important part of the college application process, especially for students that are applying for highly selective schools, right? So most colleges have over 65% acceptance rates, if I'm not mistaken. So for a lot of colleges, it's not going to be crucial that you cram. For example, you were asking about AP courses earlier. APs are just as important, if not more important, for a lot of students, right? So an SAT can sort of bump up your chances at a more competitive school, or a lot of times coaches like coaches, sports departments will have a minimum SAT requirement in order to get brought on the team or something like that. So there's a lot of different situations in which it may be important. But oh yeah, I wanted to talk about this briefly. So we have this is the SAT, right? Yeah. The big difference between the SAT and the ACT, I might as well just jump into it here, is the ACT was kind of introduced as an alternative, and it's kind of a Midwest thing. Yeah, I'm gonna just run through the ACT real quick since I just did that timeline. Okay. So the ACT was initially developed as a competitor. It is less popular overall, but it is exactly the same in terms of the acceptance by admissions departments. There's really no preference for one or the other. There are very detailed correspondence tables that allow you to convert one to the other. So really, it just comes down to whether or not most of the time, it's whether your schools offer school day tests. And here in Maryland, we do offer SATs. In a lot of the Midwestern states, they offer the ACT just because of agreements they have with the creators of the tests. So that's the real take home on that. We don't have enough feedback right now with the difference between the ACT and the digital SAT to give super concrete recommendations for which test is going to be better, right? So it used to be the case that you had more time per question on the SAT. And so in general, it was the recommended test. Yeah, that's going to be something that's an empirical question for the next, 2 or 3 tests, but that is that. So the ACT, yes, introduced in 1959 in the Midwest, and they made some similarly. So there were some rescorings. They also flirted briefly with a 30-minute essay. They extended it, and in 2021, they also introduced super scoring. So the SAT and the ACT both have this same ability to either submit the best of each section score or all of your scores, and then they'll sort of combine them.
So just so I understand you
Yeah.
right, super scoring is when you combine them, you to make your best score.
Yeah. So for example, the ACT has 4 sections: English, math, reading, science, right? So you can, if you take it 4 times, you get the highest English, then you get the highest math, highest reading, highest science, and those are combined for your composite score. You can't super score between the SAT and the ACT because they are different. So the ACT has separate English, which is sort of grammar, as I don't want to summarize this here. So the English and the reading on the ACT are very segmented, and the reading passages are well, not a lot longer, but they're fairly long, and it has a dedicated science section. So the SAT does not have a separate science section. Instead, there are science questions sort of spread out in the math section. So the math modules have both math and science. There really isn't a difference in terms of the amount of questions that are related to pretty much any of these topics. They're fairly comparable. Just because it has a dedicated science section doesn't mean it's a lot more weighted toward that or anything like that. Nowadays, the biggest difference is going to be that the ACT is 5 long passages, where the SAT is many, many, many short questions. So I'll go through that in a second here. Cool. All right, so I mean that's the overview real quick of the ACT. Let's talk about the format of the new digital SAT. So, like I said, it's transitioning from paper to digital. So no more bubble sheets, no more killing trees. We have printed out so many sheets of paper, and if nothing else, the trees can be happy. So you can take it either at the test center, or you can bring in your own laptop. They have a very easy list of requirements that you need to run the program. But the short story is there's an app, you download it, make sure it works before the test day. You can also use that app to take practice tests, which is nice. And I very, very strongly recommend doing that. You can bring your own mouse or your own keyboard. If you don't have any of those things, they will arrange to provide them for you. One of the funny things I heard from a lot of students is that they found it really distracting because it used to be pencil scratching and coughing, and now it's mouse clicking. You're in a room with a bunch of kids hammering on mouse buttons. So I don't know. I know they don't let you bring like headphones or anything like that, but if you're really, really sensitive to sound, there are accommodations where you can request like a separate room, although that would have to be something that was discussed in advance with College Board. But for those of you whose students are not going to be able to focus, or if you have any sort of concerns that this testing situation isn't going to be ideal to get them to do their best, I would recommend bringing that up early with either the school counselor or even a teacher, and make sure that they are in an environment where they can do their best. So, okay, another big change is it used to be that everybody sat down and got the same pencil and paper test in front of them, and then they all filled out the same one and submitted it. That is no longer the case, for several reasons. And I think the biggest one is that allowed for a lot of situations where students were able to cheat in various ways, right? Because there was only one version of the test. So now that it's digital, they can do it adaptively, which means the questions are randomized, so you can't just say A, B, 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 C. And then it's split now into 2 modules, they call them. And those modules get more difficult. Do I say that here? Yeah, I'll just explain it. So the exam will adapt to their performance, which means the first one is the reading and writing section, right? So there's a set of questions. Here, let me pull that up. Yeah, the SAT reading and writing section now has 2 modules, each with 32 minutes and 27 questions each. After you do that first module of 27 questions, it will look at your performance, and then it will adjust the difficulty of the questions in the second module, make them either harder or easier depending on that first one. I think that's a pretty cool change. A lot of students were kind of put off by the difficulty change between module 1 and module 2 on the math. Particularly, so timing is always like the biggest issue, or the biggest thing that students need to practice. Now that, so if you get used to the first section of 27 math questions and then go in expecting them to be something similar, yeah, you're going to end up running out of time. So definitely at least 3 or 4 mock tests before you do the real one, just so that so students have a feeling for how much time they have left and how difficult they're going to get to be. So that is the adaptive testing. Yeah, so overall, it has gone from 3 hours and 15 minutes to 2 hours and 14 minutes. So almost everybody likes that. Also, the scores I know are available much more quickly. And like I said, no more cheating. Right, so the calculator, it used to be that there were 2 math sections, one you could use a calculator and one you couldn't. Now you have a calculator in the app throughout the whole thing. So that's cool. And I have a little slide on that. Where'd it go? Yeah. So the calculator has a name. It's called Desmos. And this was another big take home from this most recent test, is that a lot of students weren't using this one for their practice tests. They were using their TI graphing calculators or whatever at home. Definitely the consensus is make sure you get really familiar with the calculator that's provided by the Blue Book app, because it has a lot more stuff. It has a lot more capabilities, and it also has, where is it? It has a math reference pop-out. So you don't have to memorize some of these formulas that I've heard my math tutor going over and over and over again. There's a little reference pop-out, which is cool. So if you need to calculate circumferences or hypotenuses, that sort of thing, that is available there. Yeah, say what you will about that, but it is available for everybody. Okay, so that's the reading and writing. Okay, sorry. I've been a little bit better organized here. Okay, so in terms of the reading and writing section in particular on the new digital SAT, so the range is a lot broader. It used to be focused mostly on like 1800s and a lot of passages about women's rights and civil rights and that sort of thing, but they were original source material, so it would be like a speech that, to be honest, like a lot of times went over a lot of students' heads. The questions that are now a lot shorter, and I think they're generally more relevant, or at least they feel like they're more relevant to the students, which is a good thing. And there's also poetry. Yay. So again, it used to be that you had 5 different passages where you would have a longer reading passage and answer 10 or 11 questions on that same passage. Now it's just one shorter one and then one question. And they're grouped now by skill sets. What are those skill sets? There are 4. So information and ideas is mostly about details or main ideas. It also includes supporting evidence, and that is I think in my observation, this is they've always had a strong emphasis on understanding argumentation and what constitutes good evidence and what doesn't. That is only increased with the digital one. I think that's a pretty good move on their part. So choose the best evidence to support a particular claim, or infer the logical, results of a few statements. So 12 to 14 about that. Craft and structure is more or less not whether that argument is valid, but how authors are making the argument itself. Yeah, so either it's either about the content or the style, basically, craft and structure. Transitional words have this is an interesting skill that I think most adult readers don't really think about, how difficult transitional words or connecting words are when you're not used to reading college level reading materials. I think that the biggest thing you can do early on, I really highly recommend, in terms of like sort of scientific competency, reading argument, or even sort of something like New Scientist or Nature, or I recommend early on that students spend time reading the way that actual scientists discuss actual ideas, right? Because the logic of that sort of being able to take the other person's side or say, okay, I agree in general, but I have several criticisms, or if that's true, right? So this way of talking is the biggest focus, because of course that's what they're going to be doing mostly in college. So if you're trying to achieve a particular purpose, so comparing things or contrasting them, how do we do that and how do we express that? And then finally, we have the good old-fashioned grammar. This has commas, semicolons, dashes, all that good stuff that we all know and love. Comma splices, the whole business. I think that for most students who are fairly like big readers or average readers, especially if they were like into the first question I always ask is like, did you read when you were younger? Like, did you read fantasy books or anything like that? Because it's just a sheer exposure thing. If the more you're familiar with how to use commas and periods and semicolons, right? But if not, it's fairly easy to get up to speed in 2 or 3 weeks on those grammar questions particularly. Okay, any questions about the reading and writing section while I have you? Nothing? Okay, so the math section is now 70 minutes long. We got 44 questions, equally between two. Again, you have the calculator for the whole test. And it used to have in the math section these word problems that were super complicated. They've gotten rid of them entirely. Math is now math, which is great. Okay, I'll go a little bit faster through these, but yeah, in terms of the math sections, you've got algebra. Oh, you may be wondering how, so algebra 2 is going, if your teen is taking algebra 2 sophomore or junior year, that's going to be the highest level of math knowledge that they're going to be asked about, right? So it includes algebra. This is linear equations, that kind of thing. There's some advanced math, which is quadratics, polynomials, that kind of stuff. There are problem-solving data analysis. So a lot of tables, charts, interpreting stats, which is great. And then good old-fashioned geometry and trig. So all of that kind of thing. Yeah, it has nearly double the number of geometry and trig as it used to. So that is a major change.
Did you say no word questions?
Yeah, in general on the old version of the test, there were science questions kind of scattered in between the reading and writing and in the math. Now it's like there are obviously words in the questions, but it's not like the two trains leaving from the station kind of thing. I could pull up an example or two at the end. Yeah, okay, so there's a couple new tools that they've also introduced. I just described the calculator. They've got a little notepad. This is just kind of good to know in advance. So because we can't use our pencils to mark up the graphs and charts, they have this notepad, so you can still kind of do that. You're also allowed to just bring scratch paper and write on that, although I think you have to leave it with them. Obviously, you don't get credit for any of that, but if you need to sketch things out or double check, you do have that available. So yeah, that's nice. One of the other things I think is a really good move here is that you're allowed to mark a question and leave it, which is great because on the math, especially, when you're super pressed for time, there's a strategy for how you approach the questions to make sure that you don't run out of time and miss easy questions, right? So now, yeah, you can just mark it. So this is what the Blue Book app looks like. And so you can just leave it and move on and then go back to it later, which I think is pretty cool. You also have the option so there's answer choices A, B, C, D. In the app, you can strike through A and B if you're sure that they're wrong, which is great because that's the first thing we always focus on the pencil and paper test is eliminate the ones that are wrong, right? So yeah, you can still do that effectively, which is nice. I described the math pop out. There is a clock at the top, and it seems like a minor thing, but a lot of the major complaints with the way that they administered the old one is that sometimes proctors would forget to announce the breaks the way that they're supposed to, or at least that's what students would tell me. And now all of that's kind of streamlined. They have when you start the test, that's when the clock starts. It's individual to you, so there's really like nothing that can. There's no variables, you know. You can also hide the clock if it causes you anxiety. Okay, that is the main overview of that test. I described the ACT. Let's talk about test dates. So both tests are offered multiple times per year. You can register up to a week in advance. Here are the links. I mean, it's collegeboard.com or act.org. You can take a look at the test dates and locations. They are offered at a variety of accommodations, and I'm sorry, they're offered at a variety of locations. There are in-school test days, and if not, you can take them on weekends, weekdays, whatever. There are, I mentioned accommodations earlier. So if your student has executive functioning or ADHD, or anything that requires them to or that would necessitate extended time or breaks or small group testing, you can get an early start on that. Here's a link, RTI Network. But what you need to do is either let the College Board know that you have an IEP in advance, or you can start the process of getting evaluated for that. Usually the longer or the earlier that students have an individual education plan, the easier it is to get it accepted by College Board. If you kind of wait till junior year and then try to get it done at the last minute, you're going to end up having to talk to a psychoeducational evaluation team on short notice. It's going to cost a lot of money. It's going to be super stressful. So don't do that. You can retake it as many times as you want. I've described super scoring here. Definitely take it more than once, and you can always check the requirements or the admissions policies of each individual school. Make sure that you know how they accept super scores and whether they accept super scores. Okay. So the last question, and this is going to have to be an open one for now. Which test is better? I used to say, in general, for most students, the SAT was better because you had more time. We still have more time per question, but I think anyone who claims to have a definitive answer to this right now is, not being straightforward, because we just don't know. But in the skills that the ACT and the SAT test are slightly different. They have slightly different philosophies. So we do have some assessments that we can help determine that. If you're interested, they are here at breakthroughtestprep.com/better-test. It's just like 11 questions developed by my colleague Harriet. They are surprisingly accurate. It's pretty cool. But in general, if you're kind of on the fence between the two tests, I just recommend taking one of each. Yeah. Test prep strategy in general. Start reading early. Just even like 10 minutes or one article a day, or doing a vocabulary, a word of the day. Making that like a family thing is such an easy to implement kind of move. I love it. You want to read opinion columns, editorials, movie reviews, whatever, but just, going for a New York Times or Washington Post, a scientific publication, anything but TikTok. Yeah, that's a really important way to start early. You can also, we do efficient reading courses in the summer, and that's sort of we kind of designed it with the skills that you need in order to do well on the ACT and the SAT are sort of efficient reading is what we call it, right? So the idea of reading at a different speed for different kinds of material. And depending on your strengths and weaknesses, that's going to be different for every student, right? Some students are really, they find it super easy to read through dense scientific stuff, but could not explain a poem to save their lives, and vice versa, right? So just being aware of where you're going to need to read more carefully, and when you can skim and how to skim. This is what we like to focus on in these summer sessions. So feel free to get in touch if that is something that might be interesting. Let's see.
So on the reading, just a question. So
Sure.
you're saying that helps you prep for all the sections, not just the English section.
So efficient reading, yeah. Usually this is 8th or 9th graders, so yeah, the skills that we focus on are how to read, how to skim, how to preview, and just more efficiently. And the feedback we get from a lot of students is just that it helps them with homework, with reading AP US history, for example. You have to read a lot of kind of older documents that would be painstaking if you don't have any kind of strategy for how to get through them, right? So being able to sort of, yeah, like I said, skim. Read the first sentence of each paragraph, read the last sentence, try to summarize it in your own words. I really enjoy trying to get them to be as efficient as they can in describing what does this paragraph say? What is this paragraph doing? Oh, it's introducing an idea? Cool. Is it a good idea? Is it a bad idea? Okay, this is a sentence that's saying something stupid. That kind of getting them to be willing to just make a good enough assessment and then keep doing that until they can't do it and then go back and and figure it out, right? So these are skills that most of us have learned for our particular disciplines, and that are going to need in college. Yeah.